Hello and welcome to the Neurodivergent Social Work Voices campaign. I am Florence Smith, the Neurodivergent social worker and your host. If you've stopped in to listen, there must be a reason why. Maybe it's to listen to and learn from the first-hand experiences of neurodivergent, or as I like to call us, neurosparkly social workers, on how you can create a neuro-inclusive workplace. Or maybe you're seeking advice from other neurodivergent social workers about what works for them. Whatever your reason, it's nice to have you here, because for 1 month we will hear from 19 neurosparkly social workers. The conversations will explore 19 journeys, 19 unique neurological profiles, and 19 tips for other neurosparkly social workers. So, why has this campaign been launched? Well, it's been done with the vision to raise awareness, share knowledge, celebrate neurodivergence, as well as increase representation of neurosparkly social workers across the profession. You can find us everywhere from students, social work assistants, frontline professionals, educators, and managers. Today I'm talking with Belle, a dyslexic social worker. Firstly, Belle, please could you tell me a little bit about your current role in social work?
Yeah, hi. So I am a third year social work apprentice, hopefully due to be qualifying in the next sort of couple of months, which has been quite a journey working and studying. And I was also only diagnosed with dyslexia in April this year. So it is a whole new world to me of learning about who I am and the difficulties that I've had over time, and also things that I thought were normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then now that I'm sort of learning, actually, I didn't have to feel the way I felt. It was because of the way my brain works compared to other people that don't have a neurodiverse brain.
And working throughout COVID as well as an apprentice, I can imagine, has brought on its own individual challenges.
Oh, completely. Yeah, a lot of lone working, which was quite hard when you're trying to learn, especially when a lot of it's on Teams. So you're trying to, for me, listen to instruction, make notes, and interact appropriately. Was quite difficult, particularly before the diagnosis. I didn't understand how I found it so challenging. So, for example, like someone would put up a slideshow, so I'd be sat there reading a slide, and then they'd ask a question that was not direct to the slide, and I hadn't actually been listening to what they were saying because I was too busy watching the slide and trying to make notes.
Yeah.
And I used to get really embarrassed. I'm saying, I'm really sorry, I didn't hear what you said. And you always get this, and it's like, I didn't mean to. But again, now that I'm sort of learning, actually, no, I need to have that in advance. It kind of has helped an awful lot to just take away that, well, basically the issues it was having on my self-esteem and my belief in myself to be able to do the job.
Definitely. And that's why diagnosis can be helpful, because it changes the lens in which kind of you view yourself, but also in terms of social work, your practice and your learning too.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, what kind of team are you working in at the moment as part of your apprenticeship?
So over the apprenticeship, I've worked in sort of different teams throughout where I am. So some statutory, some non-statutory. But for this final leg of my journey, I'm in a community team. So I work with adults age 18 plus, and that covers anybody in a specific area. So I cover like LD, mental health, older adults, some sort of transitions where they've already transitioned into the adult world, but they've still got some of the lots of joint working, lots of MDTs, linking with voluntary sectors and community makers and things like that. So a whole broad spectrum of people.
I can see you've absorbed all the acronyms already.
Sorry, yeah, I can be terrible for doing that.
Oh,
you don't explain and just shout.
Thank you very much.
And I am terrible for half the time. I don't even know what they mean. I know what they mean in terms of like the gist of it and what I need to use them for. but 9 times out of 10 I couldn't tell you what the word for word was, because it's not used. So my brain, it takes a wee while for them to sink in.
Oh, definitely. And also trying to hold the letters in your head as you say the words as well. I find if I'm explaining kind of what an acronym is, I have to write it down in order to see the order of the words, but also kind of what word it actually is.
Yeah, it can be quite a challenge, can't it?
It definitely can be. But I know you said you've recently received your diagnosis for dyslexia. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your neurodivergence and how it makes your brain sparkle.
Wow, how I sparkle. Because I've always kind of said, in a black and white situation, I am the sparkly rainbow, and that is kind of how I've described it, purely because, and it is my ability. I always used to put it down to my not focusing properly, easily distracted, but actually it's the way that I can see the picture, I can see the frame, I can see outside the pictures and all. Like, it's almost like, remember there used to be paint by numbers, and you can add the colours to make the picture.
Yeah.
So when someone's going through something, I have a really good ability of being quite black and white and succinct and quite logical. And again, that can be quite hard sometimes, because if something isn't logical and doesn't follow a set pattern, I find it really hard to either learn it or to understand it, because it doesn't make sense. So why would you do that? Mm-hmm. But equally, when it comes to, say, problem solving or risk assessments, the way my brain is, I can actually sort of see things that people don't see. And it's come up over many years, but now I understand it more so. It's because of I am. They're like, oh, wouldn't have even considered that. That isn't a thought I would have had. Oh, I wonder why you think that. So that's one of my sparkles, is that kind of seeing the unseen.
Yeah.
And also I would definitely say my ability to adapt to when I'm speaking with individual people, because I can understand some of the challenges that I feel and what can make me feel uncomfortable, and I would never ever want to put that onto somebody else. Mm-hmm. So one of the through all the reflections and records of practice and all the different things I've had to do whilst learning, and through observation, I've always been sort of praised on my empathetic ability, and getting someone to kind of open up and feel at ease and relaxed. In fact, that feel at ease has been a phrase that has sort of been fed back to me an awful lot. And you're not like a typical social worker. I mean, obviously I'm not qualified yet, but and then that makes me think, well, what is a typical social? What should I be like? What if I'm not? What should I be doing? And now with my diagnosis, I think, actually, do you know what? I'm not a neurotypical social worker. I am a neurodiverse social worker, or I will be. And that's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It adds so much to our practice and building relationships, doesn't it? But especially the empathy side of things too, because we can draw on our lived experiences, and also having been through assessments and systems ourselves can kind of relate, although it might not be the same system, can relate to understanding what it feels like to be going through the process and just assessed.
And the frustrations of, well, hang on, I've put all the information in, you've got all the facts, and then it is the delays, it is the different barriers, such as policy, tick box exercises, finding the right person to help with the right thing. I'm feeling quite powerless sometimes in that journey, and I can get a bit hyper focused on things, mm-hmm. whereby if I am doing something, it has to be done and I have to get on with it, and I can be quite tenacious when it comes to finding the answer. And equally, something wrong, such like the policy says this, but this isn't happening, I can find that quite frustrating, but not a sit down and be quiet kind of way, more of a, right, well, this actually needs to change. So I'm quite happy to, and again, I do not trouble, but I do quite often get told to be careful, and I'm like, but no, it's not right. So
yeah, it's that kind of black and white thinking of right and wrong and social justice that I think kind of floods through our veins as neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
Okay, and can you tell me a little bit about your experience of social work practice? So this could be ranging from direct practice with clients, or your experience of being a neurosparkly social work apprentice?
Yeah, so I mean, prior to starting the apprenticeship, I worked in this field anyway. We call them case coordinators. Um, so I've always sort of worked in the social care field. Um, and so meeting with people face to face and the actual sitting and chatting to people is something I've always found quite comfortable because I have an interest in people. I like to hear their stories. I like to hear where they've come from. Um, the difficulties that I can have sometimes, again, is sometimes linking in with other professionals. And it's like, but I thought this would be your remit. And they're like, oh, yeah, it is. But, and I'm like, no, that isn't what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
So although I'm quite holistic and thinking outside the box in my practice, when it comes to sort of more stringent, strict things, that's why I can, it's a little bit hard sometimes being like, no, this is part of your eligibility criteria, therefore it should be a yes. Get on with it. And that is something that I do struggle with. Also the balance of coursework and caseloads. And managing my time effectively is not one of my strengths. Still trying to put in things to make that, change a habit of a lifetime, as it were. And I'm terrible for being late to things, even if I leave an hour early or anything like that. However, when I'm meeting with people, I don't ever tend to be late for actual appointments with a person because I think for me, I know I feel an element of anxiety. I'll probably be sat there looking at my front door thinking, oh, it's 2:00. Where are they? And things like that. So I don't also like to come early because, again, for me, like if you prepare yourself for something happening at a certain time, so that's something I have to balance with my own values and who I am as a person and not to put that onto somebody else. So if someone's late for me, I don't actually mind. That's something they can do, it's their choice. So it's just sort of managing the difference between my personal self and my work self.
Yeah.
And I've kind of not created, that's a bit too strong, but I definitely have a work self and a work identity, so that things that I find quite challenging when I'm just me don't impact on my work.
And have you been given any kind of reasonable adjustments from your placement provider or through the place that you're learning with?
So my diagnosis was brought about by a fabulous tutor that I had in my second to last module of the degree, who was very kind and said that when she chats to me, I was quite competent, had a good conversation. However, my written work did not match what I was saying. To the point, she said it could almost be two different people. So she was fantastic, and it was the learning provider that supported me through that process. So at the same time, so once I got the diagnosis and then applied to the access to work with the DWP, I had that report back, say, September this year. So I applied in May, so it came through the September. So the report has now been done, and it's just sort of waiting for equipment and bits and bobs to be brought into practice. So, but what was really good about that one, a little bit of self-disclosure here. So I've always suffered, more so in the past few years, with GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder, and social anxiety. However, now that I look back at the times, yes, there have been times where I've had anxiety attacks and things like that, but a lot of it actually comes from how my self-esteem has been damaged and the fears I have due to my neurodiversity. So like the feelings of not being good enough, concerns of being laughed at, overthinking a situation, intrusive thoughts, catastrophized thinking, all those kind of things that can erupt into like this volcano of awfulness actually was me not being myself. And that's why my body was fighting me. So one of the many good things about actually having that formal diagnosis is when I start to feel these things, actually, no, it's not, I'm not wrong, I'm not incorrect, I am me.
Yes.
And I need to work with me. So yeah.
Oh, I really like that, and the embrace that you've taken with it, because I think like that is sometimes overlooked as the impact of masking and camouflaging on our self-esteem, constantly pushing down our true selves to conform, because that's what we have to do within the system. And actually that makes you feel like you've lost yourself sometimes.
Oh, completely. And I sort of look back on specific examples where, I mean, I've been on a Teams training course. And so one of my, again, pre-diagnosis, but obviously still living with that I didn't know. So I think I said earlier, struggled to sort of read from a screen, hear what's being said, and take notes and all these different bits and bobs. And they always do that classic, oh, the slides will be sent at the end. And I'm like, I need them now. I don't need them at the end. I needed them before to read, to go through. So I have a Mandela colouring book. Yeah. 30 plus, nearly in the 40s. And however, I have that ready, and I have all the pens, and I take the lids off the pens and my notepad and pen next to that. So what that allows me to do is to listen to what is being said, because I don't make reams of notes, I will put a few choice words, and that will remind me of what was said, because I'm quite a pictorial thinker anyway. And then I just use the colours, because again, one of the things that I struggle with is I get easily distracted, which is also a fantastic sparkle. I love that. So I work on 3 screens, which allows me at work to be able to bounce between a case note, a Word document, my emails, the chats, this, because I'm quite a ping brain. Mm-hmm. However, I have to close them down if I'm really going to have to focus on something. And I was actually on some training once, and the person was quite critical, saying, can you actually look at me when I'm speaking to you? And I said, oh, I do apologise, I'm making notes. Obviously, I didn't want to say that I was colouring, because, you know, if you're not in our world, in our thought process, then you don't understand that. And she's like, you don't need to make notes, you just need to listen. And I sort of said, well, I am dyslexic. I said, so I can listen, but I won't take it on board. Mm-hmm. And that person then actually sent quite a unkind email saying, I do hope whatever your difficulties is, you can override by our next session, which was appalling. And I was like, pretty certain I can't cure dyslexia. Don't really want to, because we are, you know,
our brains are our brains. Yeah. It's just that complete kind of stubbornness of, well, one would like to think if you got feedback on training saying I'm dyslexic and actually just listening doesn't help, a trainer might listen to that and think, okay, so for the next training session, what can I do to make this more inclusive for anyone else on this training who might also be dyslexic? Because there's that 1 in 10 statistic that 1 in 10 of us are neurodiverse, including dyslexia. So seeing how many people could be on that training, you should be making adaptations.
Completely. So moving forward from obviously that and it was an upsetting experience. The humiliation was quite, because it wasn't even just an in-house training course. There was other people from other areas, you know, all still the same, you know, all still sort of social work apprentices and things like that. So that field, but it was a national training. So to be singled out repeatedly was, that was quite hard. But I have learned from that. And now whenever I attend training, I sort of ping a wee email beforehand. It would be lovely if all trainers sent an email out first to say, do you need any reasonable adjustments? You remember like back in the day when we used to do face-to-face meetings, and if you got a lunch before resources got cut, they'd say, has anyone got any dietary difficulties or things like that? Whereas when it's on Teams, you don't have any of that, because there is that assumption that it is going to be all comfortable and all fine. And I think it would be nice if they were like, you could tick a wee box or quite openly share, actually, please could I have the resource in advance, or could I have a conversation about it beforehand or after, or if you are going to be asking questions throughout, which again is fantastic, can I not be the first person? Because another thing that I struggle with, especially when it's verbal, is making sure I've got the right end of the gist of what I'm being asked. We all use different language, we all use different communications, which is brilliant, but if I've suddenly gone off a tangent and in my head I think that's what we're talking about, I will make it link, and it is like forcing a jigsaw piece into the wrong part, Whereas when somebody else sort of starts, you're like, oh, that's what we're talking about. Oh yeah, no, now I can answer that.
Yeah.
So it's not like copying a colleague, but it's just making sure that you're taking the right path.
Definitely. And especially with literal thinking, I know I've answered a few questions, or if someone's made a statement and I've asked a question, just like quite perplexed, because actually I've taken it really literally and they kind of had a more, I don't know, would the word be metaphorical question?
It could, yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, a confusing question. That's what it feels like to my brain. It's confusing. I don't get what you're asking. So being able to see someone else's interpretation of it through their answer is
Completely.
very, very handy. Well, thank you, Belle, for sharing your experiences of your social work apprentice, but also of your placement as a neurosparkly social worker. Our final question today is looking at what advice would you give to other neurosparkly social workers?
Definitely, definitely. Even if you think or call yourself dyslexic, as I have done for many, many years, push and actually get that diagnosis. And do the access to work. Having this diagnosis has been it has sounds very, I should be on an American TV show, but it has changed my life.
Yeah.
Purely because I understand myself an awful lot better. And I'm on a whole new journey of not being angry at myself, not being frustrated at myself, and understanding that when I do feel overwhelmed or like a ticking clock can drive me to, I can't hear anything else, I just take the battery out. And also having that label, which I quite often hate. I don't, we shouldn't need to have labels. We should live in a perfectly, inclusive, equal society, but we don't. I can now say, because I have dyslexia, this is why, this is something. And before I didn't understand it, I thought I was just a bit quirky or a bit odd or a bit different, and how exhausting I can find the masking side of things. When you do have to sit down, you do have to, when all I'm trying to do is not stare out the window, or I've noticed that there's something going on in the car park, or that, the person's shoelace is undone and all I can see is the shoelace. I'm like, no, you have to focus on this. And it's allowing me to sort of put in coping strategies as well. And I've also been able to speak with my current manager, who's so supportive. So whereby I've got a protected caseload as a student anyway, but so whereby I will have, say, fewer people, but I get, if you look at it over the course of a week, maybe the turnover isn't that great, but if you look at it over a month, actually, by not giving me 20 cases, or just say like a 4-week month, you give me 5 cases a week, I will plough through them quite happily and do my best. They give me 20, I might get about 6 or 7. It's too much. And even daft things like having people with the same initials, can just cause a right kerfuddle in my brain, especially if they're the same gender or the same town or the same. If there's too many similarities, I do struggle quite tricky until I've done that first meeting, and then I tend to picture people's front doors.
Oh, thank you, Belle. And thank you for giving your time to celebrate neurodivergence in social work. And
thank you for having me.
Anytime. It's been so great talking to you and to hear about how your brain sparkles. And I also want to thank anyone and everyone who has been listening today. If you're interested in learning more about neurodivergent social workers and neuroinclusion, please check out the Neurodivergent Social Worker website and the British Association of Social Workers Special Interest Group. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.